Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to the Flower Lounge. I'm so excited to have Christiane Northrup. You probably all know who she is, but just in case there is a rare person out there who doesn't know who you are, Chris, do you want to just say a few words about how you got to where you are?
Yeah, I'm a board-certified OBGYN by training, and I am the author of Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, The Wisdom of Menopause, Goddesses Never Age, Dodging Energy Vampires. I've spent 40 years on the front lines of women's health, and now I say that my work, having learned everything that can go wrong with the female body, my job is now to teach women everything that can go right, find the wisdom in the body, and then how to make that their reality.
Lovely. And I should mention too, you revised your book lately, right? I think this is
Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. It's this big, very big. Just came out, fully updated. I call it the post-Me Too version, and that came out in this summer.
What did you add?
I added just huge section changes in dietary stuff. I was far more bold. Let's just put it that way. I was far more bold about everything that I was seeing in the 70s, 80s, 90s has come to public awareness now, like the Gardasil vaccine, the dangers of mammograms, the outrageous number of inductions and cesarean births, section on circumcision, this sort of thing. So it really was, the vibration of it is higher because back when I first wrote it, the first version came out in 94, and I was really afraid of, a repetition of what we call the being burned at the stake. And so I was really afraid. The book was a prayer, really, not a scientific tome, because there's a great limitation to the left hemisphere and what we call the scientific method, because truly in real science, you keep changing and updating depending upon what the research is showing, what the evidence is showing. And now I'm realizing that my gut, my intuition all along was the guidance. And what I hear from women all over the world that I love and have heard this for years is that your book actually confirmed what I always knew. I just didn't have the words, and I'd never heard a doctor say it. And I think that's the whole key, is that women's wisdom is what we know in ourselves and what we're born with, and then what we're talked out of in the way the current educational system and medical system is set up.
Wow. Okay. Everyone needs to get this book, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. Can we talk about all three of those things today if we have time? Gardasil, mammograms, and circumcision?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, love to.
I know recently I sent you a podcast that I did with an attorney, Jim Turner. And originally I had wanted to interview him about Gardasil. He kind of went off into lots of different topics. And I saw recently that you did a whole webinar on the Children's Health Defense about Gardasil. So I was hoping that we could really kind of get into the deep nuts and bolts. And like you said, so many kids are going back to school this fall. What do parents need to know, or what would parents want to know from a doctor such as yourself about the Gardasil?
It's not worth the risk. It's never been proved to decrease the risk of cervical cancer. And in fact, we now know from studies out of Australia that it's increasing the risk of cervical cancer in those girls who had HPV before they got the shot. And we're now realizing that a baby can get HPV just being born, because guess what? There are over 200 different strains of HPV. So what? It doesn't cause cancer unless there's an immune problem. And then the other thing that I want people to know is that 90% of the time, if a girl gets HPV, and they're marketing it to boys to prevent cervical cancer in a woman in the future, which is completely bogus. And But if a girl gets it, 90% of the time, she'll clear that. Her own body, her immune system will clear it. So I just want to read you a statistic here from Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. So we now have Gardasil 9. Gardasil 9 is the only one available in the United States, and it's supposed to be effective against 9 different strains of HPV, the ones that are supposed to be implicated in cervical cancer, which takes years to develop. Okay. Even though the Gardasil 9 package insert reports the rate of serious adverse events to be slightly lower than its previous vaccine at 2.3 to 2.5%, that means for every 100,000 people receiving the vaccine, there will be at least 2,300 serious adverse events. And the fact remains that only 7.4 women in 100,000 will get cervical cancer in the United States. So let me put this into plain English. 2,300 out of every 100,000 young women and men are placed at risk for serious adverse events from the HPV vaccine in order to possibly prevent 7.4 cases of cervical cancer per 100,000 women. And yet we have no data that it prevents anything. I know this is sobering because the ads have been amazingly effective. I won't be one more. And mothers and fathers are taught that in fact, what they're doing, they're targeting adolescents. And there's now laws that they're trying to pass to remove the necessity of parental consent for getting this vaccine. And so adolescents come home from school and they say, oh, I want my 11-year-old vaccine. All my friends are getting it. Mom, why won't you let me have it? And the school nurses and the school administrations and pediatricians are all pushing this. And if one were to read this book, these are my friends, Mary Holland and Kim Mack Rosenberg and Eileen Iorio, HPV vaccine on trial, seeking justice for a generation betrayed. And this is the legal stuff about it, and digging deep into the Merck clinical trials. And on our Children's Health Defense webinar, what Mary said is Merck lost a lot of money with Vioxx, which they knew was killing people. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said the pharmaceutical companies that make vaccines are serial felons. They are. They've paid out billions of dollars for being found liable for all kinds of things that they already knew. And so she said Merck described the marketing genius of HPV vaccine Gardasil as lightning in a bottle. They're making billions. And the woman who got this vaccine fast-tracked through the FDA, then after she did them that favor, she then went to work for Merck as chief of their vaccine thing, because there is a revolving door in Washington where the CDC and the FDA are called captured agencies. There's no arm's length objectivity at all. In fact, the CDC has patents on at least 50 different vaccines. So I knew back when they started the measles thing at Disney World, I thought something doesn't seem right here. And then I got it.
Huge conflict of interest.
Beyond. It's such a huge conflict of interest that you can't believe it. I mean, if you knew the amount of money that Fauci makes on these things, it's like, are you kidding me? Just you don't have to look very hard to see this conflict of interest. So I think what I would say to a parent is do your research and do not allow your child to get that vaccine unless you're in the room. And what's been happening to some of my friends, they go to the pediatrician with, let's say, their 13 or 14-year-old, and the doctor brings up Gardasil, and the parent goes, no. And then the doctor says to the child, don't worry. When you're 18, you can come back and make your own decision. So they're undermining parents now.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah.
And is this a strategy?
I think so. That's my opinion. It appears to be a strategy. Let me tell you what else goes on with this. pediatricians and other docs now are judged, their quality is judged by the number of vaccines they give. It's like a Yelp rating. So when you go into a pediatrician's office and you see the list of the doctors, they get X number of stars, and also their pay grade is often determined by how many vaccines they give. Like the quality of the doctor is measured by how many of the vaccines are given, that they're in compliance with the CDC schedule.
Wait, how does that happen? Who's funding and who's adjusting their pay grade? How does the inner workings of that?
I don't know. I just know that that's what my doctor friends tell me, that you have to give the vaccines. I think it's connected to bonuses. I have a friend at Kaiser, and she told me that's what goes on. If you do not give these vaccines, or if you simply, what is medicine involved in? Informed consent, right? So imagine if you just read the package insert, which is what I would say to everyone, just read the package insert. Just be informed, then make your own decision. And by the way, when they did the Gardasil first clinical trials, they did not use a placebo. They gave the same aluminum adjuvant in the placebo group to make the Gardasil look not as bad as it is. That's just well known. I know, you sit there and you go, wait a minute, how could this be? How could this be?
So if there are any adverse effects due to the aluminum alone, you wouldn't know that because they put that in the placebo as well.
That is correct. Now, the other thing people need to know is that in 1986, Congress passed a law. It's called the Act 1986. There's a whole documentary about it that I would recommend everybody watch, the Act 1986 by Seventh Chakra Films. And they point out that in 86, Congress passed a law removing all liability from vaccine manufacturers for any adverse event. So imagine you're a businesswoman, I'm a businesswoman, everything that we do, you could put a known poison in the LOTUSWEI things, and that's okay. And then get the states to mandate it. You have to use this divine love elixir. But yeah, it's got some toxic mercury in there, but don't worry. That's what we're up against. And people don't know this. In fact, in the movie, The Act 1986, they point out that way back, the manufacturers knew that the DPT, now called DTaP, the DPT was not safe. But they knew to make it safer, because there's no 100% safe vaccine. They needed to spend a penny a dose. They decided they'd rather deal with the consequences and keep the money. Just like the Ford Pinto. Years ago, for those who were around, Ford Pinto developed a car, the Ford Pinto, and the gas tanks blew up and 900 people were burned to death. Ford knew this, but it was going to cost $10 extra to make the gas tank safe. The gas tank was in the back, so if they got rear-ended, it would often explode.
Oh my God. So it's literally a conversation of bottom line versus safety.
That's right. And what people believe is that they must know that I can trust my doctor, I can trust the pharmaceutical industry, and the cognitive dissonance is, no, actually, you can't. And it's so painful. You can imagine, for me, knowing this stuff and knowing it for years. I mean, my kids barely had any vaccines at all because I already knew. And that was 34 years ago. But if you even tried to say something, what you get is, well, what about polio? And then if you actually do the deep dive on that through Dissolving Illusions by Suzanne, what is her last name? Anyway, she's fabulous, Dissolving Illusions. So here she is, and she's a nephrologist in Bangor, Maine, meaning she's doing dialysis all day long with people in renal failure. And she notices that when her patients on dialysis get adult vaccinations, flu, pneumonia, shingles, their renal function, their kidney function plummets. So she says to the hospital administrators, could we just wait on those shots until I've done all this recovery and they get out of the hospital? And the administrators go, no. And then she gets the whole party line. Vaccines are safe and effective. They are the number one public health thing that's worked all over the planet forever. And she thinks, wait a minute, when you do dialysis, you have a technician whose sole job is to make sure that the water used is absolutely pure, that there's no trace minerals in the water, no metals, no nothing. And when you read the package insert in the vaccine, you see the number of toxins in the vaccine, and every insert says seizures, possible death. And they're now giving them like one shot will contain 4 or 5 different vaccines. So we've never done the clinical trials that would show you what is safe and for how long.
Wait. Let me just interrupt you there. You're saying we're no longer doing one injection per vaccine. You're saying we're doing several at one time?
That's correct.
Oh, I was not aware of that. Wow.
Yeah. And kids will often go in and then, to catch up on the schedule, they'll give up to 6 shots at the same time.
Without knowing the interactions.
No one's ever studied the interactions. It doesn't pass the sniff test. And then the minute that you say anything about this, you're called an anti-vaxxer. So Robert Kennedy Jr. said, I've been trying to get fish out of mercury for 30 years. No one calls me an anti-fisher. Or it's like, let's say you want to make a safer car seat for kids, right? And you're just bringing up, I think we could make this safer. No one calls you an anti-car seater. We have to take a look at what is the agenda here. I mean, and I already knew a lot about vaccines and how they do not provide you with lifelong immunity. Getting the disease provides you with lifelong immunity, like with measles, chickenpox, and so on. And, and when I was little and when my kids were little, I tried really hard to expose them to chickenpox, and then they would have lifelong immunity, which they do. And by the way, they refused to get chickenpox when they're 2, 3, 4, despite trying to get them there. Licking the dish. They got chickenpox at age 12 and 14, which was, and in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, they believe that chickenpox is something that you get to remove excess yang energy from the body. That's when the soul has decided to stay. Then you get the chickenpox. It blows that out. And by God, when my daughter, the oldest, was over chickenpox, she started to eat, like really eat normal meals for the first time in her life. Before, she'd been one of those 2-year-olds that, eats 2 grapes in a week. And, and the parents, oh my God, eat. And so she, her appetite came back. She shot up. It was really interesting. So, and we also know that getting the measles is protective against later cancers. So it's a big conversation. It's a big conversation, and it's not a conversation that we're allowed to have. And so I always say, when something is that censored, why? Science is the search for truth. Or, and there shouldn't be any topic that's off the table. And there are many topics right now that are off the table. IV vitamin C, vitamin D. I put those things on social media, and then or Russell Blaylock, one of the top neurosurgeons in the world, publishes a bunch of things on what happens when you wear a mask. Facebook takes it down. I mean, the minute you get it up, they clearly have a bot attached to that one, and it's taken down. This does not meet our community standards. This is dangerous to the public. The censorship now is beyond. I almost want to hold up signs, like I hold up a sign, I'm talking about this, because anyway, that's kind of where we are.
It's really shocking. I noticed the other day that you can't look up #natural immunity on Instagram. It's not there. You cannot look it up.
Like there isn't one.
There isn't one. And if you look up #medical freedom, it gives you can get there, but it first gives you an option to go to the CDC and look up vaccines.
Well, yeah, I always love that everything goes back to the WHO or the CDC. And by the way, and I have not looked this up, but the sources I trust say the CDC, the WHO downgraded that thing that starts with a C and has a number after it. They downgraded it to like a severe flu in March. It's on their websites. And now, but we're all being groomed for the second wave. We're being groomed, just like if you're in relationship with a narcissist or you're Larry Nassar with the U.S. girls Olympic team. Those girls were all groomed for 30 years for the sexual abuse that he was doing. It's the same dynamic, only now it's kind of institutionalized.
You and I talked last time when we did our podcast, the last time your book came out, about battling energy vampires. And I know that our audience loved that episode.
Oh, good.
And
good.
Do you see parallels between that work and what's happening today?
Yes, beyond anything that I could have imagined. It's almost like that work prepared me for right now, in the same way that testifying at our state house about vaccine mandates prepared me for what we're going through now, because I couldn't believe what I saw. There were 3 overflow rooms of parents with vaccine injured children, and they just here's what people wanted. They wanted the ability to individualize the vaccine schedule, leave some out depending on allergies. That's all we wanted. There were no people who were, oh my God, we should never vaccinate. No one was saying that at all. They just wanted to individualize the schedule. And at the time, by the way, Maine had a 95% voluntary vaccination rate. So we were not in any danger of these dread diseases coming back. That was all a fabricated story. In the same way that an energy vampire tells you things to play on your fear, and those of us who are susceptible to that and who have given away our power to an outside authority just go along. Because to not go along is so uncomfortable. Oh, my doctor they clearly have my best interest at heart. One of my good friends who has worked in an HMO for years, she recently retired. She said, I could work there as long as the glass was really foggy. But as soon as I cleaned up the glass and I could see it clearly, I could not be there any longer. And I have a pediatrician friend, and Maine has just mandated masks for daycare starting with age 2. 2-year-olds, some of them 7-8 hours a day, wearing a mask. So I say to my pediatrician friend, he gave me the guidelines that their practice had sent out to the various doctors of how you fit a 2-year-old with a mask, how you indoctrinate them into a mask so they'll keep it on for 7 days. I mean, if you've ever tried to keep a sun hat on a 2-year-old, good luck with the mask. And so I say to him, why don't you stand up as a pediatrician and give the data that there's no one who's at risk from this 2-year-old? And he says to me, do you have any studies on this? I'm like, you're a freaking pediatrician, and the medical condition for which one would want to not wear that is that you like oxygen. And it's really good for a child. By the way, 80% of the immune system is at the body openings. It's in the nose, it's in the mouth. And so when you're constantly rebreathing your own expelled air and CO2, you're actually depressing immunity. And, so the fact that he wanted a study of 2-year-olds, it's like, what happened to your clinical intuition? I always wonder, but this is only because I have my North Node in Aries. Okay, so it's a kind of a warrior energy and I can't help myself. But I always wonder, how do you not see this? Why aren't the parents up in arms? Because it's not a law. It's a mandate from someone who thinks she's the queen. It's craziness. It's craziness. And by the way, the Gardasil is mandated in a couple states.
I thought so. Like Rhode
Yeah.
Island, Virginia,
Yeah.
DC. That's
Yeah.
what I read as well. Okay.
Mandated in New York State. They're trying to mandate it. And once you mandate vaccines in your state, generally the language, and it was this way in Maine, the language is they can add whatever they want at any time. So there are 200 different new vaccines in the pipeline. And we now have 54% of all children have a chronic illness. So it's not like we've got the healthiest children on the planet. You know, what we have here is we have a paradigm shift is what we're having. It's like what one of my heroes, Zach Bush, says, that when you have regenerative agriculture, then the weeds never take over. When the soil is healthy and when the microbiome in the gut is healthy, you can even have HIV running around and it doesn't do anything. I remember the movie Out of Africa, and Robert Redford is about to have sex with Meryl Streep, who's playing the role. And she says to him, she wants him to know she's had syphilis. And he looks at her and says, I never catch anything. So he's like in total control of his microbiome and his belief system. And what I'm noticing now on mainstream media, I was watching a show on Netflix, and what I notice is the language is they just put it in the script. So this one was, well, you shouldn't have sex with someone's teenage son. You might get warts. And then they say to him, make sure you get the vaccine. It's just in the script of this drama. Another time I'm watching Will and Grace. And, it ends with Will and Grace both having pregnancies, Will through a surrogate. And they're talking about, damn those anti-vaxxers. So you begin to see that there's a web of influence that people are being groomed, just like we said, in Dodging Energy Vampires. Yeah. About 70% at least, maybe 80, of all mainstream television is supported by Big Pharma. All stations. It doesn't matter if it's Fox, if it's CNN, it does not matter. And so there's all these things that you cannot say. Also, the US and New Zealand are the only two countries in the world that are allowed to do direct-to-consumer advertising. Ask your doctor about, and then they give you the list of side effects, which, as my friend Bruce Lipton says, are not side effects, they're effects. But remember, the average 65-year-old in the United States is on 6 prescription drugs. So, they're in the business. And I think there was what's that place? It's a brokerage firm, starts with Goldman Sachs. And they did a corporate report that got it spread widely. And it basically said, we are not in the business of keeping people healthy. That is not a profit model. We have to create illness. So we're creating customers for life. So in my opinion, that begins with the medicalization, which we call the well baby check. And the well baby check is to begin the process of creating customers. And we're now doing things in my profession that are shocking to me, and that is giving flu shots and DTaP to pregnant women. There's not a single study that's ever shown that that's safe. So you're injecting these toxins into a pregnant woman's body in the second trimester when the brain and the immune system are all forming. And then in the US, 99% of all newborns get a hepatitis B shot. And the only way to get Hep B is to share needles with an addict or have sex with a prostitute. And there are very few newborns doing that. So, and that contains, I think it's something like 15 times the aluminum that the FDA says is safe. What are we doing? What are we doing? And then I see in my medical literature, increasingly, things like parents are questioning what we're doing. We have to figure out a strategy to talk them out of that. I mean, it's gotten to the point where my own medical literature is not even worth reading anymore. There's you might have remembered the Lancet study that came out. They were studying the infamous drug that's been around 60 years, starts with H. And they literally hired a con man to do that. It was so bad that the Lancet retracted the study. And then the WHO study on that same drug used a lethal dose, a known lethal dose. So it was a study what we call designed to fail. And this is the stuff that's going on. You don't have to dig very far. But what I'm noticing just since March, the level of censorship it's beyond. And, my own team has said to me, listen, you just talk about puppies and kittens because you are one post away from being deplatformed. And I'm not exactly mentioning anything that's controversial. I talk about vitamin C and vitamin D.
And you're noticing censorship on your pages?
Oh, yes. I've been shadow banned. So my number of likes on Facebook has stayed the same for months, even though there's another thing that you can see, even though I have picked up 60,000 new people. But it just stays the same, 469,000. That's it. So that's called shadow banned. And what that means is that instead of my stuff coming into your feed when you like the page, you actually have to go and find it. Yeah.
Wow. So what are some of the, when you talk about injuries from some of these injections, what have you seen or what did you see when you went to speak in the State House? What were the parents?
They were saying that the child got the shot, immediately began to have seizures. And then when they finally woke up, they lost speech. The developmental milestones went away and the kid lost language, the ability to interact and so on. And so, sort of encephalitis, these are called encephalitis. And then the diagnosis would be autism. Then you go back to the doctor and you say, this is what happened after the shot. And then the medical professional says, it couldn't have been that. It was anything but that. And so you feel like you're crazy. By the way, the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Effects Log, has paid out $4 billion since the act passed. See, that's what was supposed to happen. Okay, vaccine manufacturers are told that they're not liable, but we do know that kids are injured. So let's put in place this other thing. Doctors don't know about it, and there's no incentive to report. And in fact, there's a disincentive because the party line, and this is what I saw up in Augusta, one doctor after another, vaccines are safe and effective, vaccines are safe and effective, vaccines are safe and effective. And so I have all these parents in wheelchairs. We even had a senator whose daughter died after getting a DPT. So death, suddenly gluten intolerance, allergies, asthma, eczema, very, very common. So that's what we're seeing. Autoimmune disease.
And when you talk about look at the package inserts, are these things on the package inserts? And how do you find the package insert? You have to request the doctor, hey, if you're going to give my son or daughter a vaccine, can you hand me the piece of paper that comes in the box with how do you get the package insert?
They're all online. You just go online and get it.
Okay.
You're not going to get it from your doctor because the doctors now, for instance, in California, the doctors who were giving exemptions started to be hunted down by the state. So doctors are afraid now to give exemptions.
Hunted down and what? They got their license taken away? Or
they have been threatened with having their license taken away or with criminal charges or whatever. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable. And mostly, here's the thing though. Okay, so we know now that how uncomfortable it is. We're herd creatures, right? And it's very uncomfortable when you go against the grain. And we look at Dr. Paul Thomas, I think is in Oregon or Washington State, and he wrote the vaccine-friendly plan. So he's got a huge practice where he's given individualized schedules and all of that. He is now being investigated over and over. They'll ask for your records. The other thing they did in California is publish the names of the families who had the vaccine exemptions. I mean, it's unbelievable when you get into this. And it's like when I start talking about this stuff, I can almost feel someone looking at me like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. But I've been wearing that hat a long time, a very long time.
Well, I mean, you've been in the medical field for so many years. And if you're saying, now 54% of all children have a chronic illness, that's bizarre. And as we're seeing autism rates skyrocket.
It's 1 in 8 now in the African American community. And African Americans have a more vigorous inflammatory response to the ingredients in a vaccine. So therefore, they're more susceptible than others. And this was known. This was the basis of the documentary Vaxxed that was started by Del Bigtree, was the producer. By the way, Del just got deplatformed from Facebook. I've been watching his Highwire show for years. He just got deplatformed by Twitter and Facebook. And he was a producer on the TV show The Doctors. So he was very used to doing medical research and so on. So he produced Vaxxed and Vaxxed 2. And then Vaxxed 2 was going across the country on a tour to interview parents with vaccine-injured children. So those I think that Adam Schiff actually wrote to Amazon, Google, Facebook, and said, you need to remove any content that questions vaccines. And they did. It's like, when does a senator get to censor an entire line of reasoning? What's that about? So it doesn't take much to find this out, but the people who are talking about it get deplatformed rather quickly. On the other hand, I'm a member of a group, Millions Against Medical Mandates, MAMM.org, and our membership grows, by the day. But, I'm a prevention person, like, women with the optimal levels of vitamin D will not get most of the diseases like heart disease and breast cancer and the thing that starts with a C and has a number over it. And so I have always wanted people to know about this before. And what's so heartbreaking to me is that the activists in the informed consent movement are, to a person almost, somebody who took their child in, like J.P. Hanley, who wrote an incredible book called How to Stop the Autism Epidemic. And, they take their child to the very best pediatrician at whatever, like the top of the line. And then this happens to their child and they're told this has nothing to do with what just went on. And then they're in such cognitive dissonance. And then they find the whole group of parents who have done the gluten-free diet and the detoxification with chlorella and cilantro and zeolite and they find Rashid Buttar has a whole protocol for people. He's a real lion in this area of bringing awareness. So it's like this number is growing, but you wouldn't know it because we can't put anything online. I mean, I used to put stuff online about this and I'd get a lot of haters. Like, it's an insane thing that you get this much hate when you just question something and all you do is read the package insert. It's the same thing with this drug that starts with an H. It's like, I had a friend send a YouTube video of a doctor who was talking about her success with this. And he just sent it to his sister. And the insanity, she came back with, you're a right-wing conspiracy theorist. It's like, what? I'm talking about something that's been around for 60 years. It's very cheap, is a zinc ionophore. It gets the zinc into the lysosome of the cell. It kills viruses. It's well known. When did this become a right-wing conspiracy theory? See, people need to awaken, but it's hard to awaken because you're going to... I had one woman in my community, she said, well, I'm down to half a friend. I know, right? Oh,
it's just been so heavily politicized. I mean, if you think about something like, let's say you're out with your girlfriends and you're having an iced tea and one of your girlfriends is debating, should I put aspartame in or sugar or stevia or what would I like in my iced tea, is a conversation, right? It's just a conversation, study, research, education, sharing.
Yeah.
But it's not politicized. So no one is going to accuse you whether you choose stevia or aspartame or whatever.
That's right. Are you an anti-stevia? Are you stevia? An anti-stevia. But I remember, by the way, stevia was vilified for a long time, even though it grows as a plant. And it's been used in South America for how many hundreds of years? But I remember when it first came out and people were beginning to use it. And it was vilified for a long time. And then I think somebody must have bought the patent for some way to use it. And then it became mainstream when it became Truvia. Yeah. Long story about that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. What's the best way to prevent autism?
Well, first of all, we do know that there are kids who are born with that have nothing to do with a vaccine. So we know that. However, that was about, when I was in med school, that was maybe 1 in 2,000 children. It's now 1 in 8 to 1 in 30, depending upon whose stuff you read. So you don't want to inject mercury or aluminum into bodies of these children with polysorbate 80, which is an emulsifier, which sends the adjuvant across the blood-brain barrier. So, and wait. So if you're going to vaccinate the child, remember that the immune system isn't fully on board till like age 2 to 4. So wait until the child has a better immune system and then just give one at a time and wait. And then there are homeopathic remedies that you can use so that you give the shot, but then you do a homeopathic remedy around it. The other thing is this: we know glyphosate is implicated. We also know, by the way, and this is important for people to know, polio was not a big deal. That it became a big deal in the 50s when they began to spray everything with DDT. And every symptom of polio matches DDT poisoning. And so if you look, you could make quite a case for DDT being the cause of what we call polio. We still have polio around. They just call it transverse myelitis or Guillain-Barré or whatever. And there are more cases of polio now in the world caused by the vaccine than by any other cause, because we know that vaccines, certain of them, if it's a live virus, will shed virus for up to sometimes 72 days, which is why in every children's cancer ward, they have little signs. Have you been recently vaccinated? If you have, do not come in here because you can spread the virus. So
that's known in the medical community.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But remember, there are forces within the medical community that are not what you think. They're not what you think. And, it all started with the Flexner Report in 1920. John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil started the Flexner Report, and then they systematically went after and closed down the homeopathic, naturopathic medical schools and the women's medical schools. And drug medicine made from petrochemicals became the gold standard, and everything else was quackery. They invented the word quack, just like the CIA invented the word conspiracy theory. So if you were doing anything other than drug medicine, you were a quack. And, like the war against chiropractic and osteopathy and all the rest of it. So what we've had is 4 generations brought up on, this is real medicine. Oh, no, they're not. No, they're not credible. They're a chiropractor. They're an acupuncturist. They're a naturopath. The real doctors are the MDs. Well, you know what? I'm a real doctor with an MD with amazing credentials. And I can tell you, it's not what you think. But I went in already radicalized, so there's that.
That Aries North node.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about mammograms. Why do you advise against them?
Well, I'm not totally against them, but I will tell you that we know they pick up too many things. They pick up things you would die with but not die from. And this is the work of Gilbert Welsh, who was at Dartmouth Medical School and the White River Junction VA, and began to study the natural history of cancer. And what he would find is that if you do an autopsy, you'll often find tumors in people that they never knew that they had. And the problem with mammograms is because we have gotten better and better at finding less and less, the mammograms now with high resolution are picking up way more ductal carcinoma in situ, which is not cancer. And that name should be changed to, I think they call it idle.
Storage.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like some kind of lesion of no one knows what to do with it. But we don't know what to do with it. They gave it a name that sounds like cancer. So then you tell the woman, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen here. So maybe so that you don't get surveillance fatigue, just have your breasts removed and you won't have to worry about it. So the number of prophylactic bilateral mastectomies has skyrocketed because women are so scared. And so what I would prefer is thermograms in conjunction with someone who understands how to interpret a mammogram. So the thermogram is a functional test where everyone has a heat signature in their breast that is unique. So you go and you get a baseline thermogram. And we know that almost all cancer is cellular inflammation. It begins as cellular inflammation. And so therefore, you find out what your pattern is. And then if you start to get more cellular inflammation, more heat. And by the way, thermograms came out in the 70s. Mammograms went out ahead in marketing, you see. I mean, if thermograms had become the gold standard, we'd have a different conversation. But it's kind of like Premarin. Premarin was the first oral estrogen available, and it was made from the urine of pregnant horses, pregnant mares' urine, Premarin. So it became the market leader, even after other things came along. So anyhow, so thermograms are functional. They tell you how much cellular inflammation there is. And here's the beauty of it. You can change your diet, change your thoughts, do a more holistic lifestyle, and watch the inflammation go away before it goes over the edge into actual cancer. That's what I call prevention. Actual prevention, whereas a mammogram just shows you the lesion. And I recently was working with a woman who was told from the mammogram, that's breast cancer. She was told that that's breast cancer before she had a needle biopsy, before anything. And she finally decided, okay, I know what I have to do. I'm Irish. I need to stop drinking. Like we know that alcohol interferes with estrogen metabolism. And we also know that if you're having a couple glasses of wine every night for stress relief, that's to shut down the distress in your heart. That's a risk factor for breast cancer. Alcohol is hands down a risk factor for breast cancer. But what you find is, oh no, people are so afraid of breast cancer, they won't give up their alcohol, but they're really worried about a phytoestrogen, like an herb. Oh God, I don't know. My doctor tells me that might be dangerous. Or,
no wild yam.
Yeah, no wild yam. Oh my God, no, that could cause cancer, but give me my wine, please. That's just the other cognitive dissonance. So anyway, what I find with mammograms in certain women, they go back every year. And I had a friend who had like 5 biopsies, and she finally said, she said, I'm done with this. These are my breasts. And if I get cancer, it will be my cancer on my terms. I'm done. And she is a doctor. So her radiology friends, berated her and all that. But then once you start to know what I know, like her radiology friend who had a bilateral mastectomy, had given up a daughter for adoption and had been bereft about it for 25 years. You think that maybe that might hit your breasts? These are the organs that are around nurturance. And as Lewis Thomas said in Lives of the Cell, cancer is the physical metaphor for the extreme need to grow. And so the body is biosymbolic. I would have had flagrant breast cancer, the inflammatory kind that kills you in 2 years, had I not gotten a divorce when I did, because I was funneling all of my caring into a dead-end relationship where I wasn't getting anything back. So we need to look at all of that. That's the holistic approach. But if you need something for monitoring, like an objective test, then a thermogram. And, if you want a baseline mammogram, go ahead. I've just seen way too many that show something. And then, once you have a test that statics the universe, it's the same with sonograms. Okay, so I've ordered 1 million sonograms and they go, can't see the left ovary. So then you got the cover your ass radiology report, which is can't see the left ovary, but if it's something bad, I'm not responsible. And that goes in, medical terms. So suddenly, just because the left ovary is tucked behind the uterus for a minute there, the woman then in her head is, oh God, what if it's cancer? You see? So that's the medicalization thing. So my friend who decided to give up drinking, she goes, okay, I know what I have to do. And I am not going to make myself a breast cancer survivor until I've switched the paradigm entirely. And of course, her lump is gone. But that takes courage. Our friend Kelly Brogan, with her getting off psych meds approach, it's so much harder in a way to say, okay, I take complete responsibility for my body and what's manifesting. And if you're me, you go, yeah, okay, I've probably done 5 lifetimes not knowing this, but now it's time. And I don't want to carry this into the next lifetime. So I'm going to get on this now. Otherwise, it's like what I tell people, if you don't clean it up with your mother, you're going to come back as identical twins. I mean, so there's sort of a whole universe within your body. And if you work with it consciously and lovingly, because that's the other thing. People go, I didn't cause it. Of course you didn't cause it. I mean, you did, but you didn't. The part of you that's trying to get your attention, your soul, is loving you. And that's why it's bringing your attention to this. That's all. Now, what medicine does is it statics it.
Right.
So anyway.
That's such a good point, because you're saying the reports make it fixed and immovable. Whereas like anybody who does a repeatable food sensitivities test, 1 year you might have a slight sensitivity to coffee. Well, then you pull back on coffee, and then the next year you go back and you're just fine.
That's right. That's exactly right. Or there are times when, the notice in the old days, like 6 months ago, when you went to Italy, you could have bread and an espresso and never have a problem with it because, first of all, they grow their grains on volcanic soil and they're wonderful and all that. And you're on vacation. So your stress hormones are totally gone. So you can do all this dietary stuff and have no problem. Whereas in the United States, instant symptoms. Yeah.
Wow. I love what you said, biosymbolic.
Yeah, that's Mario Martinez' work, the Biocognitive Institute. And Mario has been really helpful in my understanding because he says cultural portals are far more predictive of problems than any other thing. So a cultural portal for a woman would be, if you want to have a baby, it would be age 35. So you approach age 35, you don't have a baby yet, you haven't found a father for the baby, and besides, you've read all the reports that your fertility plummets, which it doesn't. Okay, it could if you keep reading the reports, because the stress hormones will shut down ovulation. So that's biosymbolic, or age 65, retirement age. So after that, you're useless. Now, we have all kinds of studies that New York City policemen in the old days, 6 months ago, would die. A lot of them died within 2 years after retirement because they see themselves as not useful anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Last topic, circumcision. What should we know about circumcision?
You're cutting off about 40,000 nerve endings whose sole purpose is Well, there's a couple of purposes. First of all, the penis is made with what's called a prepuce. So the foreskin is actually the prepuce. It's an organ. And it doesn't retract oftentimes till sometimes 7, 8, even later. It's adherent to the glans penis. And it retracts when it retracts. Just like, okay, think kitten eyelids. You don't go around to a kitten and pry open the eyelids. But in the United States, pediatricians do not understand how to care for an intact penis. So they retract it, like opening the kitten's eyelids. And there's a group that I've supported for years, Doctors Opposing Circumcision. And by the way, everybody, because you're listening to Katie Hess, I know you all understand the law of attraction, and I don't like these titles either. It should be, but Doctors Opposing Circumcision gets you a little more than Doctors for Intact Penises, okay? Anyway, they get reports every day of a baby going into the emergency room for, say, croup or whatever, and the pediatrician takes off the diaper and retracts the foreskin to keep it clean. You don't need to. Urine is sterile, it's perfectly clean, and it will not retract until it's ready. And in some people, that's 7 and 8 years old. So the doctors are causing phimosis, which is because, parents will say, well, I better get it done now. It'll just need to be done later. Like, why would that be? How did God create something that would need to be cut off later? No, it's because you're messing with it. Now, let me get into the sexual aspect of things. When you have a prepuce, when you have this skin covering the glands, it keeps the tip of the penis very sensitive. If you don't have that, you get keratinization of the head of the penis, which decreases sensitivity. And women have described having sex with a circumcised man as making love with someone whose penis is blind. They're thrusting because they can't feel. Whereas if you have the foreskin covering the penis and it only retracts with an erection, then you have all that skin that grips the rugae of the vagina. And by the way, for everybody, you transphobic people, whatever, my board certification is in cisgender women. Okay. So I don't know what goes on with everyone else. And that's for someone else. In cisgender women, there are rugae in the vagina that are wrinkles. The foreskin connects with those during intercourse. And the clitoral system, which is as much erectile tissue as a man, but it's all inside, the crura of the clitoris and the periurethral sponge and all of that gets enormous stimulation because the penis is right there on that. Now, in the United States, only 25% of women reach orgasm through intercourse. Why? All the men have sort of a blind penis and they don't know where the clitoral system is, and the women don't. So anyway, God made sex to be with an intact member and understanding how those two fit together. Now, having done hundreds of circumcisions as my job, I give this information as penance. And I will tell you that I tried like mad in the 80s to talk people out of it, and they never would. Now we're doing well. I think only 60% of newborn boys are mutilated now, compared to about 99% when I was in practice doing this. In general, you're cutting off the skin with no anesthesia, and it creates a feeding problem for 3 days. There's a deep-seated rage against women. How can your mother let this happen? I worked with a guy who'd circumcised the baby in the delivery room to get it over with. And now we have our friend B. Gates circumcising, and this is PEPFAR, it's called, hundreds of thousands of men in Africa to decrease the AIDS epidemic, which is not effective at all. Look up PEPFAR. They stopped doing it in infant boys because they were using what's called a Mogan clamp and mutilating hundreds and hundreds of boys in Africa. So
what does that have anything to do with HIV for a newborn?
Exactly. It's that correct. But that's the propaganda. Why are we doing this? And then, I don't know, did you watch Sandra Bullock on Ellen and talking about the skin cream she used, which was made from the foreskins of infant boys? Yeah. So anyway, it is a procedure that, and I've had arguments with Jewish people, and there is a movement within the Jewish community to have a ceremony, to have a bris. And that's okay, but not cut off the foreskin. And also, by the way, you can culture that skin to cover a football field so that if you ever need a skin graft, that area of the body makes an amazing skin graft. And I frankly think boys should have the right to determine whether or not they want that removed. That goes against the Geneva Convention. You're mutilating a human body without consent.
When did that start, Chris?
It started with, in the United States, it started with Kellogg, the guy who started Kellogg's cornflakes, and Battle Creek, Michigan. And he was trying to prevent masturbation. So circumcision began as a way to stop masturbation. In girls, Kellogg used carbolic acid, pouring that on the genitalia of girls so they wouldn't touch themselves. Yeah, the history is really exciting, huh?
Whoa.
And I was told, when I was taught how to do a circumcision, I was taught that they don't feel it. And then I'd strap them down onto a board like a crucifixion, and they'd scream bloody murder and gasp in pain.
Oh.
And you can't do this. You can't do this procedure unless you have a heart-mind split. You can't do it. And I had one because it's the only way you can keep doing what you're doing. And quite frankly, I think today's pediatricians giving all those shots have to have that same split, because if you really got what you're doing, you couldn't live with yourself. And whenever I have mentioned this, I always get the person who says, my boys have never had any problem with it. Well, it's not like they were given a choice. Or I'll get the guy who's 60 who says, I had to have this done later. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. My boys are all done. Okay. Again, I think that everyone should go to the website, circumcision.org, run by Ronald Goldman, circumcision.org, and get educated. Because you know what? That may be your decision for your son, but at least you knew. And I think this is what my whole platform is when you didn't know, you feel awful. But when you're informed, truly informed consent. Before I did any surgeries, I needed to get an operative consent. These are the things that could possibly happen. Then you sign the thing. It's the same with vaccines, circumcision, mammograms. Should be informed consent. But informed consent takes time. And at this point, for many doctors, the amount of time that they have allotted for their patients is 11 minutes. And they have to fill out, my pediatrician friend, I have a pediatrician friend who's a pediatric cardiologist. He said, I used to be able to dictate extensive notes. Now I have to fill in a form on an iPad. So there's no place for nuance. There's no place for telling the story. You just are you're just checking a box. And then that's all connected to what are called CPT codes. And that is what insurance will pay for. So right now we have, and Kelly could tell you this, an enormous number of people who are given the diagnosis of bipolar. They don't have bipolar. That's just what insurance is paying for. So all I can say is I wish that most everybody knew what I knew. And I also would say you need to go very slowly, be very gentle with yourself. And there is a good reason why people don't know this. They've been this has been kept from them. You shouldn't have to have gone through Dartmouth Medical School and Tufts New England Medical Center to know these things. You shouldn't have had that happen. Although Remember what I said at the beginning about women's bodies, women's wisdom. Women tell me, oh yeah, I knew this. We know this body is a vessel that can know truth when you're connected. And, it's the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off or scare you to death. And unfortunately, that's just really true. But increasingly, and I don't know if you're finding this in this time of great light coming onto the planet, we're in a time of ascension, great light is coming on. And it's just bringing up the darkness. So I call it, it's like we've all gone into a cocoon. We'll come out of it December 21st on the solstice. And as astrologer Anne Ortley says, so we're all turning into green goo, but we'll come out a butterfly in December.
And if anybody listening is really curious about any of the things that you've said and wants to take it further or just get informed a little more, is there anywhere that you recommend people just start dipping their toe in to inform themselves?
Yes. Okay. Obviously, my books and drnorthrup.com. Oh, and by the way, Hay House has a new app. Very, very inexpensive, $9.99 a month, Hay House, just the app on your iPhone or whatever. And all my books are in there, and I have recorded them in a studio. So that's if you want me to read to you, I would be happy to do that. And they're all on Audible except The Wisdom of Menopause. We're not there yet. I just sent in a manuscript for that. Also, though, the Children's Health Defense.org is very, very good. NVIC, National Vaccine Information Center, Barbara Lowe Fisher, MAMM, Millions Against Medical Mandates.org. These are all fantastic for finding the information that you need. And I think what I would do is get yourself educated about this stuff and get on the mailing list of these places. Yeah.
And any last words of wisdom that you find yourself saying commonly or that just spring to your heart in this moment?
In this moment, I believe that anyone who's interested in what I have to say is probably a starseed. And you came here to be here at this time of the Great Awakening. You're leading the conversation. It is a warrior position. It's not for the faint of heart, but you are being divinely protected as we move from 3D, which is victim, perpetrator, rescuer, black, white, good, bad, into 5-dimensional living, which is pleasure, which is love, which is the new world, not the new world order, but the new world planetary ascension. And I believe, Katie, that's your work, the language of flowers. And it's also interesting to me that getting information about the darkness is a form of light. It's not fear-mongering. Pay attention to how something makes you feel. And when you feel afraid or angry, know that your physical body is alchemizing that darkness into light. That's what you're here for. So don't be afraid. There's millions of us. Just put up your hand for the secret handshake. You'll find us.
Oh. Thank you so much, Chris.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.